Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the twilight of a fading empire to the final nights of Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen whose crown once glimmered like the dying sun over an England wrapped in fog. Outside, the wind from the Thames curls through the velvet curtains of Richmond Palace, carrying the scent of damp stone and extinguished candles. The crescent moon hangs thin behind drifting clouds, pale as the breath of an era fading into sleep. In the echoing corridors, only the wind speaks whispering softly, like ghosts of courtiers long gone. Elizabeth sits beside her final candle, the golden threads of her gown dulled with time, heavy with the weight of remembrance. The flame trembles upon her hollowed cheeks, glinting in eyes that once saw empires rise and now only the shadow of her own solitude. You might think this is just a tale of history, but trust me, you wouldn't survive the silence that filled her room that night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and share your city and what time it is there right now. Whether you're surrounded by the hum of city lights or resting in a quiet, darkened room, let the night wind carry us back through time. Beyond the palace walls, oak leaves drift across the royal pond, gliding like pale ghosts upon silver ripples. Swans move through the mist, their wings brushing the water in slow, graceful arcs. In the distance, the bell tolls once a soft, trembling sigh from time itself. Here, everything feels suspended between life and memory, between the throne and eternity. The once golden halls of the Tudor court now glow with only a handful of flickering candles. On the wall, her portrait, young, radiant, proud, still stares from another age. The fire-red hair, the piercing eyes, the fragile dignity of a woman who once ruled the world, all fading now into the hush of her last night. If you listen closely, you might hear the rain tapping against the old window panes, slow, patient, eternal. And in that rhythm, I invite you to drift, to let your thoughts wander like a small boat over a moonlit river. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. End quote. The night wind drifts through the narrow windows of the Hohenstaufen castle, each breath of air curling along the cold stone walls and into the chamber where a child has just been born. The torches flicker softly, smoke coiling upward into the rafters, leaving a faint, bitter scent in the damp air. Outside, the church bells toll slowly, not for joy, but for a soul that has just departed this world. The child's father, Emperor Conrad I, lies in his oak coffin draped in black velvet. As the lid closes, the first cry of his son rises, fragile, distant, as if echoing from the world beyond. They say destiny often begins with a breath, and that night, Conradin's destiny was written in the hush of that breath. His mother, a young widow with hair like dark silk, holds him close. The faint warmth of the infant touches her chilled skin. The scent of milk, torch, smoke, and resin from the cradle merge into something bittersweet like incense of morning. Each cry echoes against the vaulted ceiling, drifting down the hallway, mixing with the wind outside a lullaby of sorrow for a fallen empire. The servants whisper prayers, hands clasped tightly in fear. They do not fear the baby, they fear the curse tied to his blood. The candles burn low, trembling in their brass holders. On the wall, the black eagle spreads its wings, its shadow rippling whenever the wind moves the flame, like a beast waiting to devour what little hope remains. The cradle itself is a cruel beauty, carved lions on either side, an eagle in the center with ruby eyes glinting red in the firelight. Its golden edges are dull with age, heavy and cold. It looks less like a child's bed than a coffin disguised as comfort. Inside, Conradin sleeps peacefully, his breath slow and soft, eyelids fluttering as though he dreams of something he cannot name. Outside, the sky is veiled in thick grey clouds. Snow falls like dust upon the roofs and pine branches. Far across the courtyard, guards lower the imperial banner, the fabric torn, the black ink faded into the colour of dried blood. No one speaks. They only bow their heads, while the wind hums through their armour, a sound like steel sighing. Elsewhere in the castle, the Pope's scribes scratch their quills across parchment decrees signed. Red seals pressed each one, stripping another piece of Conradin's inheritance. Rome blesses his enemies, dividing his lands like spoils in a market. And still, within his cradle, the boy sleeps. His breathing is steady, like the rhythm of waves upon a distant shore. A wisp of wind slips through the shutters, stirring his fine golden hair. His mother watches, exhausted and hollow-eyed. She knows this child was not born for peace, but for penance, for sacrifice, for memory. The night drags on. Now and then, a stronger gust snuffs out a candle. Darkness deepens. Only the moonlight remains faint and silver, spilling through the narrow window onto his pale face. Somewhere beyond, a horse whinnies and falls silent again. The quiet grows so thick that even the baby's heartbeat seems to echo. Soft, patient, fragile, alive. At dawn, the winter light seeps through the curtains. The room smells of burnt wicks and cold stone. Grey-clad nuns enter with holy water, sprinkling it over the cradle, the walls, the shadowed emblem of the eagle. Each drop lands like rain upon the old wood. One whispers, "May God have mercy on this soul." Though her eyes do not lift, for deep down, she knows God rarely meddles in the fate of cursed kings. Conradin grows within walls colder than tombs. His childhood holds no laughter, only footsteps of guards, whispers of prayers, and the tolling of bells. He learns to stare into flame without blinking, to listen in silence when men speak of rebellion. And at night, when he closes his eyes, he still hears the bells of his father's funeral, ringing in dreams, slow, heavy, endless. From the darkness of a dying dynasty, a soul begins to take form not from joy, but from grief. Conradin, the child of mourning, becomes the fragile spark beneath the banner of death. Sometimes, the wind that moves through the halls seems to carry a whisper, faint and distant, from where history and dream intertwine. You were not born to laugh, you were born to remember. And then, as the night retreats, a small gleam flickers upon the sword hanging in the great hall, perhaps the light of dawn, or perhaps of destiny. Only the wind, the breath, and the slow heartbeat of a sleeping child remain reminding us that sometimes life begins in the ashes. Dawn crawls over the cold mountains, its silver light slipping through the narrow windows of Innsbruck Castle. It is not a triumphant light, more like a weary sigh from the sun itself, reluctant to shine upon what was once the centre of an empire. The beams crawl slowly across damp stone floors, across portraits of long-dead emperors, whose names have faded, but whose motto still reads, Dei Gratia, by the grace of God. In a small chamber near the watchtower, young Conradin sits at a wooden desk, his thin shoulders trembling in the chill. He is learning to write that same phrase, the justification for centuries of rule. The quill trembles in his hand, leaving small black drops like tears upon the page. His breath forms a cloud of mist, dissolving as quickly as the faith he is told to possess. Outside, doves peck at spilled grain upon the snow. Each time a church bell tolls, they flutter upward, their pale wings blending into the grey sky. The rhythm of that bell seems to slow everything down, even time itself hesitates, watching this fragile boy wrestle with the ghosts of his bloodline. Every morning, Conradin walks the long corridor to the great hall. Along its sides stand marble statues of emperors, swords in hand, crowns upon heads, eyes hollow. He must bow before each of them, while servants recite their names and reigns. Each name adds another invisible weight upon his small shoulders. At 12 years old, he already bends beneath centuries of duty. Sometimes, he gazes up at the frozen faces and wonders, do they pity him? Of course not. Statues cannot feel pity. Perhaps only time, in its quiet cruelty, smiles faintly at the repetition of history. The tutors drone on, voices roughened by years of power. They speak of blood, of vengeance, of divine order, ending each sermon with the same phrase, "The right of kings is eternal." Conradin nods politely. Inside, he doubts. Eternity, he suspects, must be very tired by now. A gust of wind sneaks through the window, extinguishing a candle. A thin curl of smoke drifts upward, twisting like a tired soul leaving the body. The tutor relights it quickly. "The flame must not go out during study, my prince. It is an omen." Conradin smiles faintly. "Then perhaps, dear master, our whole kingdom has lived under an omen for 100 years. No one dares correct him. There is something in those pale eyes, gentleness, but also the glint of a blade. Beyond the walls, winter lingers. Snow buries the fields where borders once stood. Monks pass by, grey robes dragging, chanting in old Latin. Townsfolk watch them silently, uncertain whether the prayers are for the dead or for the dying realm itself. In a room above the hall hangs a vast map. The Hohenstaufen lands are drawn in red ink, fading, fragmenting, erased by each new decree. Some corners bear a sharp inscription, under papal dominion. A holy joke if holiness had a sense of humour. Sometimes Conradin visits that room. He touches the dusty lines of lost borders with a finger, gently wiping away the dust. It's a small, quiet act, but those who see it feel uneasy, as if a sleeping empire were drawing breath again through him. At night, the castle sleeps like a tomb. From his window, the boy can see the slow river Inn glimmering under the moonlight, smooth as glass. He sits there long after dusk, listening to the water strike the stones, the rhythm of his own heart. In those moments, he feels free. An old servant once told him that the river was called the Road of Souls, carrying the restless dead to the sea for cleansing. Conradin smiled softly. Then our dynasty must have sailed away long ago. The servant bowed low but could not hide his grin. Wisdom, after all, sometimes comes wearing a child's face. Later, Conradin was sent to Munich. Spring there smelled of grass and bread. The bells floated through the air like mist. Yet even under blue skies, he felt a thin, invisible cloud hovering above him. It did not block the sun, only joy. The people called him the prince who never smiles. They would see him wandering the market, pausing near minstrels, listening quietly before walking on. In their songs he heard not merriment, but echoes, faint breaths of an empire refusing to die completely. One day, he heard a song of Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, the ancestor who, they said, still slept beneath the Kyffhäuser mountain, waiting for Germany's unity to awaken him. The people sang with hope. Conradin only smiled. That emperor, he thought, will never awaken, for the Germany he waits for has turned to ash. One quiet afternoon he stopped by the river Isar. The air shimmered gold. A single bird drifted past. He picked up a pebble, dropped it into the water. Ripples spread, wider and wider, fading into stillness. "This is my throne," he whispered. It makes a small wave, then disappears. No one heard but the wind, and the wind, as always, kept its secret. When night fell, Munich slept beneath the moon. The church bells sighed, the rooftops glowed faintly, and in a small room, the boy with royal blood lay awake, eyes open, breathing slow. The rhythm of his heart merged with the quiet pulse of time itself, until history and dream, sorrow and sleep became one. Late afternoon draped the southern German palace in fractured light, pale gold, spilling across stone floors like scattered memory. The air smelled faintly of rust and dry grass, that peculiar fragrance of youth stolen and duty approaching. In the training yard, Conradin stood small, the sword longer than his arm, yet he lifted it carefully, as though raising the weight of centuries. His teacher, once his father's guard, watched in silence. He adjusted the boy's stance, not to teach how to kill, but how to remain calm. "A king doesn't need to wield his sword well," the man murmured. "He only needs to know when to draw it and when to let it rest." Conradin nodded. His eyes, dim like a half-burned candle, reflected a kind of wisdom that should not belong to a child. Above, the sky turned violet, its edges glowing amber. Birds flew in lines, their cries soft and steady. Around him, other young nobles trained, yet none dared laugh. Only the sounds of steel touching earth, the scrape of sand beneath boots, and restrained breathing filled the air. Conradin watched them, saw fear in their eyes, not of losing, but of being forgotten. A faint smile touched his lips, a knowing one. History, he thought, never remembers the kind-hearted, only those loud enough to echo. When the session ended, he removed his gloves, wiping sweat with a white cloth. A small cut stained his fingertip red, a bead of blood darkening in the sunset. The old guard frowned. "Your blood is the Empire's blood. Keep it where it belongs." Conradin whispered back, so quietly only the wind could hear. "All blood dries, master. Only the earth remembers." "All." Inside, 7 candles glowed upon the study table. The warm light trembled across scrolls of war, maps, and scripture. Beside them sat a piece of cold bread and a cup of watered milk, a future monarch's humble supper. The tutor lectured in a monotone, speaking of balance between faith and rule, of the sacred bond between crown and heaven. Conradin listened, but his thoughts drifted. If God truly desired order, why would he let empires fall and a child inherit the ruin? He never voiced it. Doubt, in any age, is the most unforgivable rebellion. As night descended, church bells pulsed through the distance, deep and deliberate, the heartbeat of the world. Conradin stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the damp chill. The moon hung thin, a white scar upon the sky. Below, the town lay silent roofs, trees, cobbled roads, like brushstrokes on an unfinished painting. Far beyond the walls, flickers of the night market danced. People laughed, bartered, sang, pretending the empire still lived. He saw wandering minstrels, their song carried by wind, soft and far. Some said it was an old imperial hymn, promising the black eagle shall rise again. Conradin listened, smiling faintly. Every age, he mused, needs a myth to keep from despairing even when everyone knows it's a lie. Time drifted like smoke. He grew, not through joy but through silence. Servants sometimes found him wandering at night, cloak trailing like mist. They said he looked like a ghost learning how to be human. One night he stopped before the marble statue of Frederick II, his grandfather. Firelight danced upon that stone face, and for a moment the statue seemed to move. Frederick, the scholar emperor, once called the challenger of the Pope. They said he warned, "Fear not those who bear the cross, but those who hold the pen." Conradin repeated it quietly, the words breaking like sand upon the floor. He understood his true enemy was not steel, but ink. Morning came heavy with fog. Hooves echoed as papal messengers arrived. Their white and gold banner fluttered politely irony dressed as grace. They bore the decree. The Pope had crowned another king in southern Italy. The tutor read aloud, voice dry as parchment. Conradin rose, walked to the window. The sky's pale blue was strangled by grey. Silence filled the hall. Servants waited for anger, but he simply exhaled. "If they want another king," he said softly, "let them see what faith can do when it isn't for sale." Then, a faint smile. "Perhaps the joke," he added, "is that people still believe God sides with the victorious. Maybe he just watches to see who loses beautifully." That day, Conradin rode to the forest's edge. Sunlight sifted through pine needles, casting shifting gold upon his armor. Wind mingled with hoofbeats, river song murmured afar. He looked upward, the light filtering across his face. The scent of resin, the chill on his skin, all of it made him feel strangely free. In modern times, we might call him an old soul, a child aged by circumstance, robbed of simplicity in exchange for expectation. History, however, named him differently. The last boy king. When night returned, the castle slept. Curtains stirred in the quiet wind. Moonlight spilled like liquid silver across the floor. Conradin stood at the window, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep, as if practicing how to breathe for an empire that no longer could. That morning, mist lay thick across the Bavarian valley. The sun glowed faintly, no brighter than a dying candle, just enough to reveal rusted armor and weary eyes. Conradin stood upon the stone steps, his hand resting on his father's sword, cold, heavy, and wordless. The blade reflected not a child, but the shadow of one destined to carry an empire's ghost. No one called him Prince now. The whisper among the ranks was simpler. King. Below him, the soldiers gathered quietly. There were no drums, no banners, only the soft breath of horses steaming in the cold air, and the dull chime of metal brushing metal. Every inhalation seemed to rise like prayer, smoke the rhythm of a dying world's heartbeat. When Conradin raised his hand, silence deepened. He unfolded the parchment written the night before, ink smeared with what might have been tears or melted wax. His voice, calm and young, carried through the damp morning. "I come not as a conqueror, but as heir to what was betrayed. I wield not a sword, but the justice of my blood." Those words did not stir cheers. They only lowered heads not in obedience but in recognition. It was the kind of truth people forget until a child reminds them. A gust of wind lifted the Black Eagle banner. Its colour had dulled, the emblem faded like a memory whispered too long. Yet, for a heartbeat, it seemed alive again. As twilight came, Conradin entered the chapel. No courtiers, no choir, only candlelight flickering and the scent of pine resin. He knelt before the altar. The air trembled softly with his breath. Drops of wax slid down, pooling red upon the cold stone. He prayed not for victory, but for strength to endure loss. He did not ask for light, only for the courage not to drown in darkness. Outside, rain began to fall, each drop blending into his silent vow. When dawn broke, the storm had quieted. The army began its march south. There were no horns or fanfare, only hoofbeats striking stone steady, solemn, and sad. The Alps rose ahead, vast and pale. Snow blurred heaven and earth into a single grey veil. Horses slipped, wheels broke, yet no one complained. Every step was its own kind of devotion. Sometimes Conradin paused, breathing out into the cold. Steam left his lips like whispered prayers. Some said he smiled not with pride, but with the weary peace of one who had made friends with fear. He carried a small, leather-bound Bible, once his mother's. Inside it, pressed between pages, was a piece of cloth embroidered with an eagle. The thread was worn, but the pattern remained. At rest by a stream, he would unfold it gently, gaze upon it, and fold it back as someone today might guard a fading photograph, afraid that memory itself could crumble. Crossing the Alps felt like moving through a dream. Each morning, clouds rolled low over the passes. Bells from distant monasteries echoed in the fog not of this world. Some swore they heard the voices of dead kings in that sound. When the army reached the plains of Italy, the snow melted into the scent of wet grass and hearth smoke. Villagers lined the roads, silent. No cheers, no jeers, just eyes mixed with pity and faint hope. The look given to someone who believes in something long forgotten. Conradin dismounted, walking among them. He smiled, nodding, saying nothing. In the mellow light, his hair caught the sun like pale gold. He looked less like a warrior than a wandering saint, reminding the world that faith once lived here. That night, the army camped in the fields. Fires flickered, smoke rose, the air rich with wood and rain. Conradin sat apart, hand upon his sword. The wind moved through his hair. Around him, soldiers slept with weapons clutched, dreaming of glory. He, meanwhile, dreamed of dawn. Perhaps he already knew this campaign was not meant for victory. Some journeys exist simply to be taken, even when one knows the ending. Modern minds might call that naive faith or romantic folly. But in that quiet night, the firelight played upon his young face, and in those trembling shadows, something eternal lingered. Before sleeping, Conradin opened the worn Bible and read softly, "Blessed are those who suffer for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Wind stirred the flames, stretching his shadow long across the grass. A lone owl passed overhead, silent as a benediction. He closed the book, lifted his gaze to the sky, and through the clouds, a single star burned. His breath drifted upward, mingling with the quiet rhythm of hundreds sleeping souls. He closed his eyes. Fear slipped away. Doubt dissolved. Only stillness remained, and within that stillness, history began to turn once more, as softly as the wind brushing through the fields. That night, before leaving the castle, the world seemed to hold its breath. No bird, no wind, only the frail glow of old candles in the chapel, dripping wax onto cold stone floors. Each drop fell slowly, like blood from an unseen wound, making a faint sound that could be mistaken for one's own heartbeat. Conradin knelt in the centre of the room. Above him, pale light wrapped around the faded frescoes of angels who once shone in gold, now peeling, as though even heaven had begun to crumble. No one else was there, only the cross and the sighing wind. He bowed lower, whispering, "Lord, grant me not victory, but the strength to endure betrayal." His voice dissolved gently into the air, like mist melting into night. Outside, the preparations continued. The metallic clink of armor echoed sharply. and horses exhaled clouds of white steam into the dark. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, iron, and damp hay, the scent of war's waiting silence. Conradin stayed still. Perhaps, for a moment, he wished to sleep and wake to find it all a dream. But life, especially for those born of empires, never offered such mercy. A distant thunder rolled. Light flared briefly through the narrow window, stretching the shadow of the cross over his shoulders. It was not a fierce light, but weary, like a reminder that even dawn must one day fade. When the first bell rang at sunrise, he rose. The armor hung loose on his narrow frame. The helmet, heavy, bent his neck. Yet he smiled faintly, tapping the crown of iron with his fingers. "If I must die," he murmured, "let it be as a king." That morning, Italy's sky was the colour of ash. The Alps loomed ahead, cloaked in snow thick as burial shrouds. The army, small and weary, wound its way through the mountain paths. Each wheel left a deep scar upon the ice, like a will written by ghosts. At the front, Conradin rode silently. The sound of hooves, the creak of leather, the steady rhythm of breath together, they became a hymn. The young knights beside him wore helmets too large, their eyes bright with a light that war was waiting to extinguish. Sometimes the horses slipped, soldiers dismounted, breaking the ice with hammers. The echo of metal striking frost spread through the valley, a sound that could awaken the dead. No one spoke. They worked, breathed, and moved as though hypnotized by faith and fear. Those who looked at Conradin did not see majesty, only a boy of 16 with rain-soaked hair and distant eyes. Yet perhaps it was that quiet fragility that made them follow, for they saw in him not power, but truth. In the villages they passed, peasants stood by the roadsides, candles in hand. Some made the sign of the cross, others simply watched. An old woman pressed a piece of bread into a soldier's palm. "For the boy," she said softly, "so he may live one more day." Her words rippled through the ranks like a prayer. At night, the army camped upon the slope. Fires crackled low. Smoke rose thin and slow, and snow melted into damp grass. Conradin sat apart, watching the flame. The wind hissed through the tent walls like whispers from the past kings, empires, dreams turned to dust. A voice asked quietly, "Are you afraid, my lord?" He looked up. The firelight caught in his eyes. "I do not fear death," he said. "I fear being forgotten before I understand why I lived." Later, songs began. Young soldiers sang softly of the black eagle and light that never dies. Conradin listened, smiling faintly. Perhaps that is humanity's quiet magic, the will to sing, even when tomorrow may never come. The wind stirred, bending the firelight across his face. His shadow wavered, half boy, half king. Maybe that is where history begins. In the moment, someone dares to stand between two selves without breaking. In the modern world, our battles are different mountains of doubt instead of snow, exhaustion instead of blood. Yet perhaps we all must whisper what Conradin once did. "If I must fall, let it be without bowing." The night grew long. The fires dimmed. The breathing of the soldiers mingled with the sigh of the wind. Above, the stars were veiled, save for one faint spark on the edge of the sky. Conradin looked at it once more before closing his eyes. Silence descended. No metal, no hooves, only the steady heartbeat of those who dared to dream amid the war. The wind began to howl as the army climbed higher. The world had turned white, vast, soundless, merciless. Each hoofprint lasted a moment before the storm erased it, as if the sky itself were trying to wipe them from memory. No one spoke, no one smiled. Only the rasp of breath, the hiss of frozen air cutting through skin. The sky was a dull grey, its clouds torn like rags. The sun, if it still existed, must have hidden behind them, unwilling to witness what was happening below. Snow fell in slanted sheets, thick enough to blur the figures ahead into silhouettes. Conradin rode at the front. Frost clung to his cloak like a shroud of glass. His lips had turned blue, but his eyes steady, pale, bright, burned with a quiet defiance, the kind that only those who have lost everything can hold. Behind him, a soldier slipped. There was a short cry, then silence. The column halted, staring into the white abyss. No one said a word. Only the wind answered, whistling its cold requiem. Conradin did not look back. He knew that mercy was a luxury of the living. They went on. Each body buried by snow, each hammer blow-breaking ice to clear the path, became part of a grim symphony. The mountain seemed to test how much faith could endure before it shattered. Sometimes the wind carried other sounds, a whisper of silk, the faint tolling of bells. Some said it was illusion. Others believed it was the ghosts of emperors past, marching beside them. Conradin heard, and instead of fear, he bowed slightly, greeting his ancestors in the storm. When night fell, the blizzard came. The world dissolved into white chaos. Tents tore apart. Horses screamed. No one knew which way was forward anymore. Conradin dismounted, walking beside his steed, his gloved hand gripping the reins. His breath clouded, vanished instantly. An older knight came near. "Your Majesty," he rasped, "should we stop?" Conradin's answer was quiet but sharp as the cold. "If we stop, we die. If we go on, we might die. But at least we die moving." By dawn, the storm had passed. Light spilled over the peaks, scattering across 1,000 ice crystals until the world glittered like steel. Soldiers lifted their faces toward the pale sun, eyes hollow with exhaustion. At the final ridge, the land opened. Below lay southern Italy green, sunlit, alive. Far villages appeared like strokes of paint on a pale canvas. Red roofs, white smoke, olive groves, shimmering silver. After weeks of grey and silence, colour felt almost holy. Conradin halted, breathing deeply. The air tasted warm, real. His horse stamped softly beside him. For a moment, the boy looked like both king and child, someone who had finally seen proof that light still existed. News travelled fast. In Florence, work stopped. In Pisa, grey-bearded nobles whispered of the golden-haired boy who crossed the snow. Priests wrote in their journals that perhaps God had not forgotten the house of Hohenstaufen. The common folk simply sighed. Poor child, but beautiful courage. History, after all, has always loved the doomed. They said in Florence a blacksmith took down his rusted sword, polished it, and told his wife not to fight, just to remember. In Siena, scholars debated whether justice could ever defeat the church. And in taverns, men raised their cups, murmuring, "The boy is naive, but better naive than corrupt." Meanwhile, the army kept moving. In every village, bread appeared. Water was offered. People stood in silence, hand to chest. Few believed he would win, but all hoped he would not die forgotten. The night before reaching Florence, they camped in an olive field. The southern wind was softer, carrying the taste of the sea. Moonlight draped the trees in silver, turning them into slow-burning candles. Conradin sat beneath one, listening to the rustle of leaves, voices of the past, telling old stories. A young soldier asked quietly, "Do you think they believe in you?" Conradin smiled faintly. "They don't have to believe in me," he said. "They only need to remember that someone was not afraid." He closed his eyes. The night was filled with small sounds. The crackle of fire, the snort of horses, the gentle hum of insects. Together they formed the slow rhythm of life, continuing heartbeat against the quiet of history. Tomorrow would bring destiny. But tonight, among the silver trees, everything was still. The moon rested upon the boy king's face, and the breath of history passed over him, soft as mist. The evening before the fateful day, the sun sank slowly, almost unwilling to witness the dawn of battle. Its dying light spilled over the hills of Tagliacozzo like tarnished bronze. Wisps of cloud hung low, glowing orange like diluted wine. Far below, Conradin's camp flickered a small, trembling spark against a vast and fading sky. He stood in the center of the camp, cloak heavy with dust, boots crusted with dried mud. Before him, a map lay spread upon a rough wooden table, its corners held down by stones. The wind slipped through the canvas, stirring the parchment until it whispered softly. Around him gathered the old men of war knights, advisors, survivors of his father's age. They argued, drew lines, and erased them again. One, grey-haired and red-faced with drink, said hoarsely, "The east is open. If we strike from there, we can encircle them." Another countered, "No, from the west. The sun will be behind us. God will shine on our backs." Conradin had heard it all before. God, glory, strategy, beautiful words spoken mostly by those afraid to lose. He watched them quietly. In their eyes he saw hunger, not hope. They did not seek victory for the empire, only for themselves. The firelight caught their faces, turning them into foxes among the shadows. When the meeting ended, he folded the map. The sound of paper rustled softly, like a sigh. "Tomorrow," he murmured to no one in particular, "there will be no victors, only those who die believing." The wind carried his words away. That night, he walked between the tents. The wind smelled of soil and smoke. Inside, soldiers huddled around embers, breaking black bread, sipping water, whispering names of wives and mothers. No one spoke of triumph, they spoke only of rest. He passed a group of peasants in patched tunics, farmers turned soldiers. They bowed, and he nodded back. He gave them his own ration of bread. "Share it," he said softly. "We may be few, but we are the last faith left." An old man wept quietly. Perhaps it was the first time he had ever seen a king speak as a man. Candles burned across the camp, not for light, but for prayer. Each man knelt before his small flame. Some clutched relics, others their rusted blades. They whispered not for luck, but for meaning. Somewhere, a hymn rose, cracked voices, slow, woven with wind. "If I must die, let it be as a hero." The song drifted through the night, blending with the hum of fire and the rhythm of breathing. Old men told tales of past emperors, of Frederick who once defied the Pope. The young listened, sharpening swords, cleaning the dried blood from their banners. Between fear and pride, they forged courage. Conradin sat apart, the firelight painting his face pale and hollow. His hand rested on his sword, still and calm. Perhaps he was listening to his own heartbeat, heavy, steady, a sound that felt older than he was. He did not sleep. Distant horns echoed across the valley, mingling with the restless stamping of horses. The night hummed with anticipation not of glory, but of an ending. He thought of his father, long dead. Of his mother, who taught him to pray during storms. Of the marble faces of his ancestors, staring down in judgment. A faint smile crossed his lips. "You'll be disappointed," he whispered. "I never planned to win." The moon drifted behind clouds, its light sliding over his armor like tears. Before dawn, thunder rolled from the south, not rain, but mountain echo, deep and solemn, like heaven clearing its throat. A black bird perched on the eagle banner, flapped once, and vanished into the fog. "A sign," murmured a guard. "Good or bad, who can tell?" At the camp's edge, knights polished the black eagle flag. The old bloodstains had turned brown, but they cleaned it gently, as though tending to the skin of a dying empire. Inside his tent, Conradin sealed a letter, a prayer, an apology, and a few words for his mother. The ink had not dried, the last line blurred where his hand trembled. He looked outside. The sky was turning pale blue washed with grey, like a shroud stretched thin. Somewhere far away, a horn sounded long, solemn, echoing. It tore through the mist like a voice calling from history itself. Conradin drew in a deep breath. The air smelled of grass, of metal, of smoke. He whispered, "If I must die, let it be for something that once was worth believing." Then he stepped into the light of morning quietly, calmly, like a boy attending a mass, not a war. That morning, the sky over Tagliacozzo had not yet woken. Mist lay heavy, a white shroud across the plain. Silence stretched, thin and tight, like the breath before a scream. Horses snorted clouds of steam. Metal clinked softly, armor being tightened by trembling hands, the small ritual before oblivion. Conradin rode a slender red horse, its coat dark like dried blood. His golden hair fell over his brow, brushing the cold air. Ahead, the banners of Charles of Anjou rippled a forest of spears and silk. The faint sun broke into shards upon the enemy's armor, glittering like 1,000 cruel eyes. For a moment, it almost looked holy, as if war were merely another ceremony. A knight leaned close, whispering, "Your Majesty, shall we wait for the signal?" Conradin nodded. His breath vanished into mist, the same mist that would soon swallow them all. Then the horn sounded long, sharp, a blade made of sound. The young army charged. Mud flew, hooves thundered, steel drew silver arcs through the fog. They moved not from strategy, but from faith, that reckless, human thing that lets men die smiling. At first it seemed to work. The Anjou line faltered. Their front ranks broke apart. Shouts rose, "The prince still rides!" The cry rang like a bell over the valley. Swords clashed, shields splintered. The rhythm of battle was the rhythm of hearts, wild, uneven, alive, and dying. Blood sprayed across Conradin's armor, warm against the cold air. His eyes stayed bright, clear the calm at the center of the storm. The smell of iron mixed with earth. Somewhere beneath the roar, one could almost hear the slow fading of heartbeats. But miracles, as always, come with fine print. From the western hills, new banners appeared golden, endless. "Charles has reserves!" someone screamed. That, history would later note, was when hope ended. The trap closed. Arrows fell like rain, shattering shields, piercing flesh. The ground turned slick. Men fell wordlessly. Horses screamed and folded. The clash of weapons became a dirge. One soldier, sliced clean in half, remained upright for a heartbeat before falling, making a dull sound like a door shutting. Conradin roared, "No retreat!" His sword flashed a streak of light against chaos. Painters would later imagine it as divine radiance, but it was simply desperation wrapped in courage. He rode into the mass of soldiers, striking wildly. The smell of burning metal filled the air, sweat, blood, and terror melting together. His horse trembled, breathing hard, as though it too understood the futility. Behind him, friends were falling. The Black Eagle banner split, soaked through with blood. A young knight collapsed beside him, whispering with his final breath, "You still have light." Then silence. Crows circled above, their wings slicing the air. It sounded like the flutter of departing souls. Evening came early. The sun slipped behind the hills, unwilling to watch. The battlefield glowed dark red earth reflecting sky, sky reflecting death. Broken shields gleamed like shattered mirrors. Conradin looked around, barely a few dozen men left. A stray arrow grazed his cheek, leaving a thin crimson line. He gripped his sword tighter. "I will not kneel," he breathed. The words were quiet but steady. He turned his horse and rode toward the forest, not in fear, but in defiance of annihilation. The hooves struck mud, the armor clattered, and the air behind him filled with the sound of pursuit. The forest loomed, dark and indifferent, yet to him it looked merciful. He glanced back once at the field that had become a graveyard for dreams. History would later record that the Battle of Tagliacozzo ended swiftly and decisively. But there was nothing swift about it. The stench of burning flesh, the moans of dying horses, the hiss of broken arrows, those were edited out by time. History, after all, is an art of cleaning up emotion. That night, fires still smouldered across the plain, lighting the rows of bodies like fallen stars. The moon drifted overhead, silvering fragments of broken steel. At the edge of the woods, Conradin collapsed against a tree, breath shallow. The night hummed crickets, crackling wood, the slow sigh of someone still alive. An era ended not with fanfare, but with the fading breath of a boy who once believed that loyalty could defeat the world. The wind from the Tyrrhenian Sea slipped through Naples' narrow alleys, carrying salt, seaweed, and the tired tang of iron. Afternoon light tilted across red roofs and fell in thin golden threads upon old walls. Far behind, in the forest they had fled, hoofbeats were gone, only dry leaves whispered of a chase already ended. Conradin was led onward, iron biting his wrists. Each step made a soft, hollow knock, the sound of a clock counting down. His breath moved slow and warm in the evening chill. Small white clouds escaped his lips and vanished into the briny air. The city opened around him, noisy yet distant. People drew back along the stone road, neither cheering nor jeering. Most simply watched with eyes mingled of pity and curiosity. Some made the sign of the cross, some turned away, as if looking directly at sorrow were a sin. The guards' laughter rang thin, armor clinked like cheap bells, and an occasional taunt floated up, only to be swallowed by the smell of the sea. "Justice will be done," someone murmured. A mother with a child replied, "Justice?" Perhaps the stamped and sealed edition. The lightest sarcasm drifted off like dust. The fortress gate closed behind the escort with a deep, humming thud, leaving the sun outside and letting shadow crawl in. Corridors were low and wet. Torches pushed an amber shiver along the arched ceiling, stretching figures like long tongues of night. His cell lay at the far corner, where the sea's voice arrived only as a faint breathing. Stone damp, straw sour, iron old, together they made an incense of gloom. He lay back and felt the cold climb his spine like a hidden stream. With a bleeding fingertip, he traced the rough wall and carved a single small word: justice. The letters darkened and lay still, a windless candle. The first night passed like a long hymn. Rats rustled under straw, distant drips counted the hours, boots changed shifts, and all of it blended into a low, steady music. Each time a patrol went by, torchlight slid across the wall, briefly igniting the word and then letting it fade again. Conradin's breathing stayed even. Sometimes he whispered a prayer his mother once taught him. Sometimes he listened to his heart knock softly, as if asking entry to a room no one would open. Days of questioning followed many questions, like waves, answers with nowhere to go. Papers stacked upon a long table, red seals shone like stains that could not be washed. The men across from him, robed and well-spoken, always began in the name of order, and ended with a conclusion already written. They called him rebel, invader. He answered calmly. He sought only the rights of his house. He had come not to seize, but to fulfill a vow. Their quills moved quickly, rain of ink on parchment, while their eyes were somewhere else. In any age, record-keeping tends to outrun truth-finding. Rumour travelled through fish markets and stairways facing the sea. The boy king will be judged. Some said tomorrow, some said in a few days. History rarely cares for appointments, it arrives when the seals are ready. Vendors spoke more softly. Minstrels changed to sorrowful songs. Mandolins sighed like long, patient breathing. Mothers hushed their children. And even they slept lightly, for the night surf sounded saltier than usual. In the cell, an elderly priest was allowed in. He asked little. He handed Conradin a small candle and whispered, "Would you confess?" The boy smiled, thin and warm. "I would say thank you." Then he spoke the names of those who had followed him through snow, of villages that had given bread and water, and of a soldier who had taken the first arrow meant for him. The priest closed his eyes. Each nod matched a bead, sliding along old fingers. At the door he laid a hand on Conradin's shoulder. "Let God look upon you as one who breathes, not as a sentence." Well, at dawn of the appointed day, the 29th of October, in the year 1268, the moon lingered, pale milk on the sky. The city woke early not to begin a day, but to witness one. The square spread out like an open palm. Stalls were moved aside, windows unlatched, steps becoming benches. In the centre the scaffold waited, resin sweet from new wood and iron rich from old blood, the scent of a church that hosts wedding and funeral at once. He climbed the wooden steps. Chains made a faint music, like salt falling into hot broth. His face was serene, not from indifference, but from having tasted the last bitterness of waiting. Sea wind salted his hair and cloak. From the front line, a boy about his age looked up, wide-eyed. Conradin gave him the smallest smile, the kind one offers to a childhood passing by. The priest beside him spoke the prayer. The voice was even and unshaken, an ancient lullaby for someone setting out. The crowd divided into two quiet tides, one folding hands, the other laughing too loudly to cover its own fear. Far back a whisper, "Time for justice to wash its hands." Another voice, "Or to wash its hands of justice?" A brittle laugh. Then the bell tolled, long and thin, and the air stretched tight. The headsman tested the blade. Sunlight found it, flashed once, and died a day-star falling through noon. Conradin knelt, lifted his chin a little. He spoke softly, more to the wind than to men. not to win, only to keep the vow. The words had no resting place. They slid across the square, over rooftops, and out toward the sea. The moment fell like a light ash. No howl, no sky torn. Only a precise motion, a dull sound, and time closing like an old wooden door. For a breath, even the gulls held their wings. The crowd exhaled together, a thin white mist rising and dissolving. Blood entered the grain of the boards slowly. Morning light turned it orange-red and gentle, not violent a stranger sunset visiting the dawn. Some wept quietly, some prayed. One man slapped a friend's shoulder and looked away. At the edge, a girl drew a small cloth from her sleeve and placed it upon the wood, like laying down a petal without a flower. News went out on full sails. Chroniclers would write, "A rebel punished by law." Bakers, boatmen, and mothers would say, "A boy steady to the last breath." Their version bore no red wax, but it did carry breath. When the scaffold was cleared, the sky brightened as if washed. Waves tapped the stones with a patient rhythm, the heart of the sea. A single black feather, from no one knew which bird, turned in the wind and settled at the square's edge. A child picked it up, studied it, and hid it in his pocket. Years later, he would tell his own child, "One day the wind gave me an eagle's feather." Deep in the cell, the word justice remained on the wall, tilted slightly. No one scraped it off. Perhaps the guard believed that sometimes leaving a word in peace is itself a kind of peace. The city resumed its ordinary pulse boats out, ovens lit, voices calling vegetables by name. Yet beneath the noise, if one pressed an ear to Naples' stony breast, a very small tone could be heard, like a lingering heartbeat, the rhythm of a vow kept, useful or not, remembered or forgotten. Modern minds might say, had there been social media, the boy could have told his story before others wrote it for him. Perhaps or perhaps not. The deepest things, breath, eyes, a calm smile before the blade, do not stay fully on pages or screens. They live in the sleep of listeners, in nights when wind brushes the curtains, and in the instant before we drift off, when the heart slows to the sea's patient tide. So the tale closes on a saline breeze, a pale line of sun, and a word cut into stone. No drums, no trumpets, only silence, the oldest language of justice. Sea wind combed the great square with a gentle hand, carrying salt and a trace of lemon from distant gardens. Morning light unfurled like thin silk across the red roofs, and windows blinked half open. Gulls wheeled low, and for a breath held their wings, as if listening. At the centre lay a new block of timber, paler than the surrounding stone, a misplaced shard of sunlight. The air grew heavy, yet the murmurs stayed soft, like foam. The crowd gathered into two quiet shores of one slow river. On one side, faces flushed, eager to watch law at work. On the other, lowered eyes and hands to hearts, prayer slipping unspoken through the throat. An old woman on the steps rolled rosemary sprigs between her palms and whispered to no one in particular. A fishmonger set down his pole. The sea's brine mingled with fresh resin, a scent like festivals no one wished to celebrate. The path to the platform ran like the spine of a large fish. When the soldiers appeared, armor clicked in a measured rhythm, the metal music of an invisible clock. Conradin walked among them, slender, cloak breathing with the breeze. Chains at his wrists made a small sound, not brutal, merely punctual. His face held a calm that comes after all the words are spent, and what remains must be said by silence. High on a balcony, a few gentlemen leaned on the rail, eyes narrowed at the Sunday. "They will write that justice was done," one murmured. The other turned a small notebook, smiled without teeth. "And forget to ask whose justice." The exchange drifted down and vanished into the crowd's breathing, dust motes in a beam. The priest came forward. He did not prod or lecture. He set a trembling palm on the young head and prayed, in a voice even and slow, a sea lullaby for one setting out. Conradin's lips moved, only the wind heard the words. A thin line of sweat touched his temple and disappeared into the salt air. Those nearest bowed slightly, as if to keep the tone from shattering. A little girl gripped her mother's hand. "Why must people be quiet when they are sad?" she whispered. The mother answered, "With a stroke of hair some reasons grow taller than explanations." Sometimes only silence keeps a heart from breaking. The headsman tested the blade. The sun flicked a frail spark along the edge, then let it die. No counting, no watch. The hour, as usual, knew its own way. When Conradin knelt, the sea breeze lifted his golden hair and carried the taste of salt to the steps. He raised his chin, not proud, not afraid, like one greeting a horizon he had come to know. A single bell tolled from the eastern church. The note thinned the sky into a held breath. Then the moment fell like a light shadow. No roar, no tear in heaven. A precise motion, a dull sound, and space folded like a door eased shut. Gulls paused. The crowd exhaled together. Thin white mist rose and vanished. Blood seeped into the grain with the pace of a slow afternoon. Morning turned it a warm orange red, a stray sunset walking into dawn. Hands went to faces, to chests. A few forced a brittle smile to keep from weeping. At the edge, a street artist sketched in charcoal, not to sell, only to remember. The wind lifted the paper's corner, as if sharing a portion of memory with the sea. Whispers swam under the arches. A boy of 16. A vow kept to the end. A sentence prepared beforehand. Words disagreed. The weight of quiet did not. The largest events rarely live in noise. They arrive when 100 lungs choose to slow. When the inner morning ended, the crowd unstitched into narrow streams to the fish boats, up the stone incline, into a shade-dark tavern. Life did its work. It went on. But on the slope toward the harbour, a child found a small splinter, a darkened streak along it, and pocketed the wood. He did not know why. He might never. Some things we keep not for worth, but for the lightness of a story. Guards loosened knots and carried the platform to storage. The sun climbed, shrinking the pole's shadows to pinpricks. From an open window, a mandolin unspooled a steady line. Even as surf, no words needed. Words would only burden the fragile clarity the city was guarding. Beyond the quay, a boatman faced the shore, then turned away. He dipped his oar and traced a clean path. Water tapping the hull sounded like a deep breath. "It is all done," he said to no one, neither grim nor relieved a weather report. In a nearby monastery, a young scribe wrote the entry by hand. Date in words, no figures, no gaps for doubt. He worked with stubborn ink, as if the line itself might soothe the eyes. At the last sentence he slowed. He chose to write not punished, but passed through, and capped it with a small dot like a sigh. Evening lowered slowly, lemon blossom stronger on the air. The square returned to thin footsteps, small voices, late baskets. On the steps the old woman still held her rosemary. She plucked a sprig and laid it down. For the child. A draught slipped through, carrying that green fragrance as a belated anointing. Modern minds may claim, with cameras and a feed, the day would have been different. Perhaps, yet cameras miss how sunlight touches a tranquil cheek, how a bell slackens a whole city's pulse, how gulls pause for exactly one beat. Such things live only in the soft archive of tellers and in the listener's sleep, where breath is more persuasive than argument. Days later, they said the timber was sawn small and stored away, as if tucking in a piece of a set Sunday. Someone whispered of a black feather landing at the square's edge. Someone else of a stone where a single drop had dried tails thin as smoke, but more enduring than many pages with red seals. On a cell wall, the word justice still tilted, stubborn and quiet. No one scraped it, no one polished it. It remained like a silent breath, neither loud nor fading. Sometimes, when the night is very still, that bell is said to ring again in memory, drawing a slender line through sleep. The square lies under the moon. The structure is gone. Only salt, bright flecks remain. The sea breathes steadily, the city too. And somewhere at the lip of thought for those who once stood there, the boy of 16 still climbs the steps carrying not a demand, but a way of keeping a promise. Light as a hand upon the heart, heavy as a hand upon history. In the end, the vast event settles into a very small motion inside us, a deeper breath, a slower beat, a pause no one wishes to break. From that pause, a legend quietly begins not to shout, but to become the soft pillow where memory lays its head. After the bells stopped stretching the morning thin, The sea wind crossed Naples as always, only now the alleys seemed to keep quiet a little longer. The city's familiar scents, salt, lemon, the bright rawness of new catch were joined by something subtler, the resin, sour breath of fresh-cut wood. At noon, when light went pale, a few bent silhouettes searched the guard's storage yard for boards with darker grain, as if tracing the signature of a day just folded up. They did not name what they were doing. They wrapped the splinters in coarse cloth, tucked them under their coats, and passed the gate like people who had found a story. Word had it the scaffold was broken up quickly, the way authorities prefer mirrors put away. Yet, in a damp inner court, where sun visited for a brief breath each day, a few planks swelled and lingered, still smelling bittersweet. A boatwright brushed them with his fingertip and drew back as from flame. Later, in his shop, shaving a keel for a small boat, he inlaid a sliver into the prow, hiding an invisible arrow to steer by fairness through fog. Those shards travelled the smallest roads. One lay hidden among kitchen sticks, taken out each night and set in the palm before snuffing the candle, like a modern person laying a hand on the heart when a device reports a pulse. Another, wrapped in linen, hung by the baby's smock. The mother swore that when wind passed, history turned over softly. Others reached violin makers, who set them into pegs, and claimed the tone grew lower and kinder, less like a blade, more like breath. From Naples, unshouted footsteps moved north and south. Their route drew no line on maps. It was a chain of solitary figures, along stone walls, over damp steps, slipping into devotional crowds. Each carried a small thing, a strip of red cloth cut from an old curtain, a coin gone sea, green, or a black feather caught from a gusty roof. They did not arrange to meet, yet their mirrored offerings made them a single, secret pilgrimage. People who believe justice, though late, still needs an address for its mail. The boy's resting place lay in foreign soil, among nameless stones with rills of season-cracked moss. The entry was past lip to ear. Turn at the arch of white blossoms, walk a few breaths, follow the high wall where water stains run. There, without calling, place your palm on the cold. Some tie a red ribbon into a small knot. Some drop a rusted coin into a slit of stone and listen for the thinnest sound, like wax falling into a silver tray. Some set a black feather on the moss and blow gently so it chooses its own slight drift, a whisper that knows where to lie. By night, after the chapel candles guttered, the smell of wax remained hanging. Wind crossed the narrow and brushed the red strips until they trembled like unwritten lines. No one read them, everyone understood. The moon slid over the wall and poured a silver seam on the stone. In that seam the pilgrims imagined his fair hair, not to show beauty but to keep composure lit. In taverns, the relic tales were told like grown-up fairy stories. Whoever holds a sliver finds the courage to tell truth where it is unwelcome. Whoever ties red cloth at the grave learns the art of silence at the right time. Whoever keeps a black feather remembers the way home in a crowded maze. Pragmatists laughed. All make-believe. Then they hid a tiny chip in a drawer, just to see whether make-believe could remember the way back. Pilgrim steps were leaf-soft. Some arrived to take a single slow breath and leave. Some knelt long without a word, letting their eyes rest upon stone. Some wrote brief lines, burned the paper, and let ash wander letters posted to whatever office lies behind walls. An old priest sometimes passed without prying into petitions. He set a hand on a shoulder, the way one rests a palm upon an unfinished melody, and went on, leaving incense and footfalls as light as wind. Here is a rarely told detail. In a nearby niche, people sometimes found wooden buttons, broken pencil tips, or a heel of bread wrapped in wax paper. Not relics at all, mere human ways of saying someone had come and remembered tomorrow's dinner. Justice, after all, is not only big words. It is shared crust, a mended button, a pencil stub, enough to write one short line. Far-off towns began marking doors with small signs, a lightly drawn quill, a slanted red wax slash, a lone letter tilted. Quiet badges to recognize friends without shaking hands. Today one might call them icons, personal brands. Here they felt like a draft. Stand in the right place and you would sense it at your collar, a gentle sarcasm. Officials dislike pilgrimages that sell no tickets. They posted notices with clauses long as litany: no gatherings, no candles, no red ribbons, no feathers. The last ban proved difficult. Feathers still fell, wind still brought them, hands still lifted. What law can forbid a small hand slipping into a pocket? In the rains, the path to the grave smelled sweet damp. Moss fluffed a cushion underfoot, and people slowed to spare it. In summer, stones kept heat, and distant lemon drifted like the prayer of someone who had never learned how to fold hands. Whatever the season, the cadence was slow. Each step was a breath. Each pause, a bell without rope. One evening, a typesetter from a lead shop arrived with an old hand-cut slug that read Justitia, carved by some clumsy ancestor. He pressed it to the stone, lips set, then lifted it, leaving a faint grey kiss. No one reminded him languages differ. The stone understood. Back home he washed, and the ghost scent of lead clung on like the smell of a small resolve, stubborn as thread. Sea folk came before dawn, when the surf beat a heart into dim rooms. They slipped a white shell into a crack, sometimes a short length of frayed rope. For the boy, they murmured, so he knows there are still roots and boats still have berths. Turning away, they breathed more slowly, a shoulder lighter, as if they had set down a crate no one could see. Years went by without making the route appear in any guidebook, and yet it brightened in common memory. Newcomers followed wax scent and the flicker of red ribbon and the susurrus of moss until they arrived. Old visitors closed their eyes and let fingers slide along the cold wall until their feet knew. Each time the black feather turned, not pointing a direction, but keeping the heart from rushing too fast ahead of sorrow or hope. Ask, do these relics work miracles? And a storyteller will smile. If there is a miracle, it is this. Leaving that place, people speak more softly, keep a hand longer on a shoulder, give up a spot on the step more readily, and when they sign a petition, their script rounds out, as if a candle somewhere had coached their breathing. So the pilgrimage goes on without drums, without banners, with light as thin as dew on moss, with drips counting patience, and with offerings so light the wind agrees to carry them. At the end of the path, no one waits for anyone. Yet each arrival finds a companion already there. Gentleness, having come earlier, lays a hand on stone and whispers, "We still remember." Afternoon tilted across Europe's monasteries in a quiet gold, where dust drifted slowly in scriptoria. Leather, lamp-black, warm pine, the air breathed like a sleeping chest. At long tables, chroniclers bowed their heads, quills touching ink like prows cutting a calm sea. They wrote the boy's name in rounded, patient letters, so each syllable had room to breathe. No voice rose, only paper whispering and a breeze moving through a narrow casement, enough to stir a leaf as if agreeing. Some began with a single line. A dynasty closed with a child's breath. Others took the river's way, circling carefully, setting down the day's pale blue sky, the length of the bell, the taste of salt slipping into the square. They refused figures. They trusted words. The 29th of October, the year 1268. Letters, more than numbers, know how to soothe. Margins blossomed with inky fingerprints. There a scribe drew a tiny black feather, a red knot, a sharp-nosed boat aimed south. They called it the habit of silence. Should rulers read, they would see only ornament. The art of keeping is wind-like. The tighter the fist, the less it holds. With the coming of the Renaissance, thin skins of oil paint dried on canvas. In studios smelling of flax and linseed, a painter laid down his brush as one sets a woken child back to bed. He pictured the boy without crown or robe, head inclined, eyes lifted, chin pointing toward an unseen horizon. Light entered from the left and warmed a cheek like a small bowl of water. Behind, a soft dark cupped him so he would not stand alone. The model's legs trembled. The brush moved as quietly as breath. Each layer of colour was an unnamed prayer. On certain church walls, carvers set the boy in soft limestone. Their blades travelled lightly, fearful of snapping silence. The figure was not large, only the size of a teen who might stand in a vestibule. Passers-by slowed, because stone eyes seemed to ask them to swallow sharp words. When rain came, drops purled upon the brow like chrism. The old queued longer. beads sliding finger to finger while hearts rounded their beats. Poetry sought the tale the way a bird seeks its rail. On riverbanks, poets chalked drafts on stone before copying to paper. Long lines, long breaths, slow pulse, so listeners might sleep in the vowel's hum. They trimmed explosions, they preferred drift. In verse, justice was not a blade, but a steady candle bright enough to find the footpath, soft enough not to sting the gaze. At fairs, reciters offered a few stanzas and stopped, leaving a hollow for the crowd to continue the story inside. The art of keeping often lives in the hollow. The stage raised another kind of platform not to end but to begin speaking. Velvet parted as if opening an old letter. A young actor in plain tunic knelt under the hush and spoke short lines, not to persuade but to let the audience breathe with him. Someone dabbed eyes in the back. Someone frowned in the front. Between those banks of feeling, the play glided like a boat into fog. After the applause, people did not chant. They kept still. A long scarf of silence passed hand to hand. Censors sometimes set their seals like bruises. But copyists understood water. It finds a way. They traded justice for candlelight, eagle for blackbird, Naples for the city of salt. Anyone who had stood in that square would smile, hearing a bell inside a word without a bell. New presses rose like wind gardens. The hum of the wheel matched the rhythm of sound sleep. Lead letters slipped into trays, became lines, became pages, became a road of characters soft enough for bare feet. Handbills browned by rain kept travelling through bakeries, taverns, quays. Readers folded a corner, a small habit for marking where the heart had been touched. Beyond books and paint, small things kept memory. A tarnished silver ring engraved on the inner face with 4 slanted letters. An olive wood rosary hiding one dark bead. A grey glazed cup with a red hairline around the lip. Artisans did not explain. Users understood. Lifting, fingering, turning each act to dip into a closed, cold stream. And somewhere in a newer century, a storyteller sat before a black keyboard, the screen like a window at night. He typed slowly and paused at commas, listening if each word would weigh on a reader's shoulders. He replaced digits with words, knowing that words have pulse while numbers have corners. A light sarcasm slipped by. Algorithms remember everything, except what should remain quiet. He added a pause, a white line to give quiet a shelter. Later generations stood in museums before the boy with lifted chin. They did not recall every dynasty or lineage. They only heard their own breathing slow in the cool. A raked light held motes like gentle snow. A girl put a hand to her chest, counted 1 beat, and left, dropping the soft period of a fallen hair. Elders at home opened a frayed book and drew in the rain scent of old ink. They read a few lines aloud to a drowsy child, voices lowering until letters turned to breath and breath to even sleep. The child dozed, hugging the book like a pillow. The art of keeping, in the end, is the art of sliding a small cloud under a tired head. Seasons thinned the bell's echo, but the city kept a slow enough pace for walkers to hear their souls on stone. In the library, a keeper labelled a new shelf. Stories humankind wishes to remember gently. He set an extra soft chair by the window. Afternoon lay upon it like a yellow cat. Whoever sat there breathed a little deeper. On book spines he tied a fine red thread, a reminder that the road to justice is not straight, but can be fingered like string. While the outer world sharpened its noise, certain rooms held a better hush, a page turning, a nib touching paper, the exhale of someone who has found the exact sentence. There, chroniclers and the art of keeping leaned against one another as 2 walls hold up a roof. Weather may come and light may spill, but beneath that shelter, memory is set neatly not for display, but so that the weary may enter, close their eyes, and hear a boy from long ago whisper, "Only keep the vow." Night moves softly over roofs and steps, carrying the sea's salt and a trace of lemon. Above, a fine ribbon of moon is laid across the sky, pouring down gentle lanes of light. In sleeping streets, leaves touch and murmur like old friends. Far off, a river drifts without hurry, keeping the moon's image without spilling a drop. And somewhere within memory's vaulted dark, the name Conradin still glows like a candle not yet spent. Dynasties may fade and crowns turn to ash, but human hearts keep the small grains of light. Whenever cruelty raises its voice anywhere on the continent, a simple sentence travels from mouth to mouth. Remember the boy who chose to keep his vow, even at the cost of his life. The sentence does not rouse anger. It moves like a cool breeze smoothing hair, reminding us that honor, when carried with calm, can show a path through the long night. Across centuries, the straight-backed figure of a youth facing the storm has walked into poems, paintings, stages, and quiet marches. His name is not borrowed to shout, but to recall how he breathed slow, and even on the day the sky leaned toward despair. Since then, smiths lift their hammers with a gentler wrist, copyists pause longer at commas, and sailors slip a white shell into a pocket as a vow to return to a kind harbour. Justice, in that way, stops being a sharp word and becomes a warm rhythm that eases the heart. In distant cities where rivers bend like arms around their banks, travellers sometimes halt on bridges just to watch the moon fall upon water. They need not know every line of history. They only notice their breathing slow by a beat, as if a light hand had come to rest on the shoulder. In that moment, Conradin, without crown or robe, returns like an old friend, smiling softly, reminding us that courage is not an explosion, but a quiet steadiness. In little chapels, candles still burn low and even, casting a trembling seam of light along the wall. When wax settles on the stone, the flame holds the warmth of a recent prayer. Outside, olive leaves hush together with the sea's own storytelling. All of it invites us to close our eyes and trust that while the road of justice winds and wanders, it always finds its way back to listening shoulders. If there is one lesson to carry into sleep, let it be the lesson of gentle resolve. Justice kept with patience, and loyalty needs no trumpet. It walks on quiet feet, visits each doorway, lays a small red thread on the spine of a book, teaches us to speak more slowly, to forgive more widely, and to stand a little straighter in the morning mirror. And when night lowers like a soft blanket, that legacy lies beside us, peaceful and wordless. Now, if you look toward the window, you will see the moon still there, unhurried as a kind guest. The breeze moves through a thin curtain, with a brushlight sound like a far bell. The river flows on unhurried. The leaves sing, not loudly. The candle, nearing its end, brightens once more a small goodbye to the day. Everything says you are safe. A story has kept watch for you since centuries past, and it will keep watch tonight. So place your hand over your heart and listen to its quiet tide. Let the heavy things slip away on your breath, and let the gentle space be filled with stillness. If a wandering thought arrives, smile, and let it drift like a leaf beneath the moon. Conradin has gone far, yet his calm remains with us, a little lamp showing the footpath toward morning. Rest now. Tonight the moon keeps vigil, the wind tucks in your blanket, the river hums its slow song, and the leaves keep watch at the sill. May your sleep be deep, where justice needs no argument, and simply shines just enough like the last soft candle in the room. Sleep well, and I will meet you again in the kind light of dawn.